We need for the kids to go out and smell the sunshine, and by hiding the treasure chest, it was a good way for a man and his wife to get the kids out and not only fishing but exploring. Nature is a wonderful thing.
Welcome to Sidebar, a podcast by Courthouse News. I'm Hillel Aaron, and nature is a wonderful thing.
I'm Amanda Pampuro.
And who was the old guy?
That was the late Forrest Fenn. An Air Force veteran and antiques collector, Forrest famously hid a treasure somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, leaving a poem with clues to find it.
And what kind of treasure are we talking about here?
Everything said gold, and rubies and diamonds and emeralds and sapphires. And so that's what I did. There are 265 gold coins in that treasure chest. Most of them are American eagles and double eagles. There are some ancient Middle Eastern gold coins. I can't read the dates, but I think we're talking 12th, 13th, 14th century.
So real treasure. I thought you were talking like metaphorical treasure, like public lands are so great, they're like treasure.
No, hello. There's treasure, both real and metaphysical. But the thrill of the chase inspired a lot of people to explore off the beaten path, including this guy, who spent 4 years on the Forrest Fenn Trail.
Really, the experience was much more than just even if I'd have found that treasure, which I did not. I really think the most incredible part of that experience would have just been the searching and being out there in Mother Nature doing that, seeing our beautiful country.
This is John Collins Black.
But anyway, I had that experience, and then a few years later, we had COVID, and life kind of like came to a grinding halt. And I'm not exactly sure what your experience was, Amanda, but mine was a lot of time at home thinking about, my life and what I might like to do next in the next chapter. And I was like, it would be really cool to put together a treasure hunt.
The clues to find the 5 treasures John hid around the U.S. are all in his book, There's Treasure Inside.
So I have a box called the Forrest Fenn box. It's an ode to his, and it has some of the items of his treasure in my box. I hid the treasure on some place I was searching that I thought would be a great spot. So you can rule out Yellowstone. The contents of those treasure chests are worth millions and millions of dollars. I've got a lot of cool historical items, things from George Washington, Amelia Earhart, Henry David Thoreau, then Andrew Carnegie, lots of really unique historical items. Is a lot of gold coins, of course, because the treasure needs a lot of gold coins and gold bars. I even have digital treasure such as Bitcoin, and there's a lot of cool jewelry and antiquities and just all things with lots of different great stories around the different objects.
Is it a spoiler or wrong to say, hey, all of this stuff is in publicly accessible places?
No, it definitely is. And if you read my book, I have very specific guidelines. I have a whole section on safety because I didn't want, anyone to do anything crazy and that would, endanger themselves. And there's no reason to find any of the treasures I've hidden. But the other was about private land. There's no way, shape, or form was I ever going to consider hiding something that was on private land, or really that you needed to go through private land to get to. I think that privacy rights should be respected. And the last thing that I wanted searchers to be out doing, because searchers can get really enthusiastic, I was really enthusiastic. I must have been to do my own treasure hunt, but I wanted to make sure that people, stayed on public lands. We have one of the great things about our country is we have so many public lands, and so the options are plentiful for hiding treasure.
I'd love to ask you about some of your favorite public lands or national parks.
I grew up in North Carolina, so I have a whole. One of my treasures is hidden close to the Appalachian Trail. But I did a lot of camping in North Carolina, and the Asheville and the Blue Ridge Mountains are a beautiful area that's close to my heart. I got a chance to see Yellowstone for the first time when I was hunting for Forrest Fenn's treasure, and that's like being on Mars or some foreign planet.
You don't have to be on a literal treasure hunt to fall in love with public lands. But I think it's a good way to describe that feeling of being outside, of finding a place that feels like yours.
There's that Calvin and Hobbes comic where Calvin tells Hobbes he's been digging all day and found a bunch of rocks and bugs.
Yeah, and they are both so delighted about it. But if public lands are full of treasure, they're also vulnerable to trash.
Right. The more people you have anywhere, the more people stuff they do.
It's just people. Too many people ruin any place. They do. Not everybody's going to take care of it. I mean, I never used to see hardly any trash up here. Now I pick it up when I go. That's what this pocket is for.
That's Bob, a fisherman I met in Waterton Canyon just south of Denver. And while I was wandering around the wilderness, I also happened to meet Gwen Lockman, who was seeing her partner off on the Colorado Trail.
I guess I should play my hand here a little bit. I am an environmental historian.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, I mean, public lands are sort of what we have left of the commons. We have city parks, and those are extremely valuable resources. But these public lands outside of cities, they are a part of how we learn about the environment, how we take care of the environment, how we think about our national identity and what we want to be in the future. But it's also really complicated.
Complicated is my favorite kind of story. So we agreed to talk later without all the background wind. In the meantime, I drove 263 miles west to see some of the Bureau of Land Management property that had been identified for Utah Senator Mike Lee's public lands fire sale. More on that later. The Desert Mountain Book Cliffs run between western Colorado and eastern Utah. Proponents said this would be a good place to build a new city since the government isn't doing anything with it. Opponents decried the loss of sacred scenery. I wanted to see it for myself and did not expect what I found. 2 more miles. Hello?
Hi, Amanda. This is Gwen.
Hi, Gwen. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. One thing, over the weekend, I was out in Grand Junction. I went out to some of that BLM land that was being proposed for sale that apparently nobody's using. And I was really surprised to see that it was completely trashed, full of couches, and there's a shooting range out there, and all the signs were just inch to inch covered in bullet holes. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a place that nobody loves, but is publicly owned. And it just made me kind of wonder, what does it take to make a place be cared for by the public? And what does it take to have the tragedy of the commons take over it?
Yeah, that's a big question. Sounds like another dissertation in the making, and probably a few books. But I'm thinking back to, my particular expertise in this idea of why parks or why public spaces are supposed to fix things. And really, part of it is that the right management is supposed to keep the commons okay for everybody's use. And so part of this, I think, gets into very basic, sort of social contract theory of what do you give up in order to have a public good? What do you give up in order to live in a healthy society? So do you give up this section of land that is beautiful and desirable for the sake of everybody to have access to something natural, to something biological, to something that is healthy? And in a vacuum, I think a lot of people would find it pretty easy to say yes to that.
Gwen studied how use of one park changed over time.
Columbia Gardens, it was in Butte, Montana, and admission to the park itself was free.
I think one of the reasons why I am so fascinated by your work is that I crave more free time and more leisure.
Yeah, one of the criticisms that I get about studying people's free time is that I get the argument really frequently, well, not everybody gets free time. A lot of people have to work a lot of jobs. But I think even if you do have to work a lot of jobs and they're low paying and maybe it's a lot of tasks that are in a service position, maybe you're traveling between your jobs, maybe customers slow down, and today it might look like, well, you pull out your phone and scroll the internet. I guess another way to talk about freedom is to talk about boredom, which is something that we actually don't get to experience a lot of in this really highly technological, content-driven, mediated time.
Do the way people interact with public spaces change in this smartphone era where every minute of your day is monetized and distracted and people are ogling for your eyeballs?
I think so, in part because in some ways it doesn't make sense to that world and to that cultural moment to actually get to have access to free space or to, the idea of the commons has gotten really sort of muddied up. With the social media age, sure, in some ways it's a public space, it's a commons, it's a conversation going on, but we're also tucked into these echo chambers and corners of it. And you also have to be able to have a smartphone or an internet connection or an account or whatever number of things. Public lands, you do still have to get there, but the content is being outside. The content is enjoying the natural environment. Growing up, going into these spaces where mom and dad's phone wouldn't work. Cell phones didn't work, you didn't have reception, and so you got this break. And I actually sort of hate going into these spaces and having cell phone reception because it totally changes things.
I love those moments when you're like, wait, what is that word? I can't remember, and I'm just gonna have to sit with that feeling of uneasiness that I can't remember.
Yeah. Mark Maron has a great stand-up comedy moment in one of his routines where he talks about what you would have to do 40 years ago if you didn't remember something and how it would just bother you all day.
Speaking of boredom, Columbia Gardens came to be because of bored broke miners.
So I looked at miners who came out west into the Rocky Mountains. They try to get rich mining, but their mining claim that they end up with isn't particularly viable. So now they're stuck with this land and they go, well, what do I do to make money off of it? And so a pretty easy thing to do in mining communities was be involved in the entertainment or vice industry. So this might mean selling alcohol or running a racetrack, any number of forms of entertainment just sort of outside the city limits. You can get away with a little bit more.
Drawing people in with free admission, local elites use the park to limit these vices.
So going to picnic was free. Going up just to be there and promenade or go for a nice walk was free. But then once you were there, you paid for things. This is your concessions, your amusement park rides. Maybe there's a dance you have to pay for a ticket to go to or a musical performance. But it's actually really strongly mediated by an elite section of society who want people to act a certain way to make the community look good. So anytime in the United States we're really talking about public land and the way we've conceived it in our systems, it is in some part about trying to control behavior into something that is supposed to be acceptable. And I don't think that we can really separate that from our national parks, even though they are preserved in the name of, conservation of natural resources and preservation of pristine environments.
So there's rules. Those rules include carry out your trash and keep your dog on a leash.
Those are good rules.
I think that's part of the difference between a beloved national park and trashed BLM land. They're both publicly owned, but in one, people follow the rules, and in the other, people don't think they matter. That's the one that ends up at risk of being lost.
We don't use any national monuments, any conservation lands, anything that's federally protected, anything like that. And what you get left over is enough to really easily build hundreds of freedom cities because, again, the federal government just owns so much land.
This is Arthur Gales, a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Let's talk more about that recent proposal to force the federal government to sell off 3 million acres of public land.
What we did is we mapped out every possible site for freedom cities among the land that BLM manages that could feasibly be developed on over the next, 0 to 40 years, which is Once we have those 400 original sites, we can narrow down to the top 20, citing 2 in each state, and see kind of which freedom cities are closest to jobs, closest to housing, in areas where the demand is high, so price to income has gotten really out of whack compared to where it's been historically and where it is nationally. And we're left with a couple freedom cities and states with better BLM federal land that really are ideal for building cities upon.
Yeah, didn't Donald Trump propose something like this on the campaign trail?
He did. Seemingly because, like Arthur, he believes people value home ownership more than they value the government holding on to undeveloped land. Arthur's analysis is rooted in the notion that local zoning laws have stymied development, and that opening up federal land gives people a chance to start over.
Well, like many people about my age, I'm a millennial. I struggled to find housing when I was living in California.
He studied low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, a federal affordable housing program.
One of the drawbacks with LIHTC housing is that despite spending a great amount of money, they just don't build very many homes. And so often the low-income housing that gets built serves the people who live in the home, but that leaves 99% of the population underserved by a housing market where it is largely illegal throughout the United States to build what we call naturally affordable housing at market rate prices. And that's made illegal through land use laws and zoning in particular. So that has led to an interest across the political spectrum in resolving kind of the zoning issues that have held back housing construction and thereby made housing more expensive. That affected me personally, but I think has become an issue that really started in California, where the housing shortage has been and is most prevalent and has spread really across the country.
If that sounds libertarian, Arthur tells me the American Enterprise Institute is nonpartisan. But the most vocal group behind selling off public lands has traditionally been people who just don't feel right about the government having so much land or power.
Libertarians.
Yeah. There are quite a few snags on the plan, like even under this expedited process, it would still take decades to build houses. There aren't any clear incentives for people to move to these places, and of course...
people hate the idea. Some people, anyway.
Senator Lee ultimately withdrew the proposal. Arthur said the Institute is going to advocate for an executive order. But the idea of selling off public land, even to build housing, can be political kryptonite. And so the system is designed for the federal government to hold on to land.
And 1976 really marks an important turning point in the history of our laws and policies related to federal public lands. My name is Chris Winter. I'm the executive director of the Getchus Wilkinson Center here at Colorado Law School.
Ready for another acronym?
No.
FLPMA.
Flip what?
FLPMA, the Federal Land Management Policy Act. Before this, the government just gave away land whenever it felt like it, divesting millions of acres to railroad companies and universities and homesteaders throughout the 19th century.
That sounds like a good idea.
One critic from the Gilded Age after the Civil War said it was like there was a great barbecue, and if you were there, you got a big chunk of land. By the 1970s, the mood had changed, and we got...
FLPMA, and that marked a turning point, and that produced a change in policy. And the change in policy is the federal government would retain federal public lands in federal ownership in perpetuity and manage those lands pursuant to multiple use and sustained yield principles. You know, a lot of foreign countries will have parks, and those parks are set aside. But this idea of multiple use, sustained yield public lands across the West is really, really unique. And I think also is incredibly important for the future of communities.
This is how the people actually take control of federal lands.
Like in a Forest Service context, if you have a particular interest in Forest Service lands and you want to see an area protected from old growth logging, for instance, or some other type of industrial activity, citizens can also go to the Forest Service and say, hey, when you're developing a plan for how to manage our local forest, please protect this area, which we know provides really good wildlife habitat, and maybe set this aside from commercial logging.
What about getting rid of federal lands?
Under FLTMA, BLM can sell off public lands if it identifies specific parcels and works with local communities to figure out how those parcels fit into the community's long-term plan for economic development. And then BLM can say, okay, here are the specific parcels. We've made a decision. We've concluded that the public interest in transferring these lands to a local community is more important than the public interest in retaining them. So the values for economic development outweigh scenic values or recreational values. So BLM has to reach that conclusion. And then if the parcel is larger than 2,500 acres, Congress has the ability to review and override BLM's decision.
This process allows Clark County to buy up federal land in Nevada so Las Vegas can grow. And Grand Junction, right below the Colorado Book Cliffs, also recently bought BLM land without needing a big, beautiful bill. Public lands are sold off on a case-by-case basis.
And so then we're thinking about the long-term protection and management of these places, which is so important because they provide clean drinking water for communities. They provide a place where families and kids can connect with nature. They provide fish and wildlife habitat. Those are the kinds of values that we have to protect over the long term in order to make sure that they're there for our kids and their grandkids. When we talk about privatizing public lands, then those private owners are much more likely to see private lands through the lens of short-term economic gain.
How do you know what's going to be good for everyone?
You don't. And what's good for the many is not always good for the few. Take the American bison, also called buffalo in the old songs. They once roamed the whole continent. After being nearly wiped out in the 1800s, a few government-managed herds live in the West today. There's one at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal north of Denver. And long story short, the Army made mustard gas there during World War II, cleaned up the place, and reopened it as a national wildlife refuge in 1992. Today, they have 250 bison, give or take, but the native people who traditionally lived alongside them still have limited access.
The first thing that I think we probably would love to see is that a native nation, preferably the Cheyenne and Arapaho of Oklahoma, would be allowed to enter into a co-management agreement with the Rocky Mountain Arsenal and begin to take over supervision of that buffalo herd.
This is Rick Williams. He founded the nonprofit People of the Sacred Land and advocates for native land restoration, starting with giving indigenous people a stronger voice in the management of lands they had historical stake in.
I believe that the next iteration or the next generation of interactions with Native people in Colorado and beyond should include various types of arrangements that are conducive to both economic development, but also for restoration of cultural land and resources in cases where necessary, preserving sacred sites.
Native Americans wait in line and pay entrance fees with everyone else, even to access sacred sites. Take Roxborough State Park, southwest of Denver.
It's one of our most sacred sites, but we have to pay to go pray there. And because it's a state park, we don't have access to it. I feel emotionally and spiritually exhilarant. And the reason is that when I go, I feel the spirit of the people. Feel the spirit of our ancestors who used that place for thousands and thousands of years. You know it when you walk in there, if you have that sense of connection to the land. I'm not saying that this is, exclusive land for Indian. I think I would hope that we would be able to do a really good job of preservation and taking care of the environmental concerns, but also perpetuating an interaction of people with the land in a good way.
Are there any things that you think, like when you go see the buffalo at the arsenal, what do you think they're lacking or craving or just not getting in their current management?
The ability to migrate. I think that's, and, being able to move freely around. There'll be a time if we keep doing those kinds of things, we will have buffalo that are like deer and elk, instead of being confined into only certain areas. There's no reason why we shouldn't have that.
When I pitched this episode, I thought it would be driven by the conflict of competing visions for the land. But the guy who wrote The Political History of Public Lands shot down that theory. He said the biggest myth about public lands is
that they are a divisive force in American life, that the decisions made about them have been mostly kind of a federal land grab over state and local opposition, and that they're controversial and unpopular. I'm John Leshy. I'm an emeritus professor at UC College of the Law, San Francisco, and former solicitor, that is general counsel of the Interior Department in the Clinton administration. I also worked in that office in the Carter administration.
His book is called Our Common Ground, and it is a wildly entertaining political history of public lands.
Our elected representatives in government made lots of decisions along the way that resulted in what we see today. And those decisions were by and large bipartisan.
That's awesome. Democracy actually working.
Yes, right. And we often forget that. But, I think it's worth reminding people from now and again that the government actually does do some things that are good sometimes, and we should not forget that.
John told me, even though big proposals to sell off public lands are political suicide, there are quieter ways to appease the desire to shrink government.
I'm sure you followed some of what the Trump administration has been doing. He's proposing to make very serious cuts, and is making very serious cuts in the management of these lands, including the parks and the like. And the Park Service has laid off, a couple of thousand people. And why
are they doing that?
As you know from the recent experience with the proposal by a few members of Congress to sell off a bunch of lands, there was a huge reaction to that said, no, we don't want to sell off these lands. If you look at the sort of libertarian right wing of the Republican Party for the last many decades, really going back well before Ronald Reagan, they really in principle don't like federal lands. They think the government should not be owning and controlling and managing all these lands. If you look at history, there are a lot of examples. Ronald Reagan in his first term proposed to sell off 30 million acres of what he called surplus federal land. And he had the president of the United States, and he had a Republican controlled Senate. And he put that proposal out there because a bunch of economists, free market economists, had convinced him that was a smart thing to do. He put it out there, and it got no support from anybody. Republicans ran from it as fast as Democrats. And it just cratered. It never advanced in the Congress at all. And Ronald Reagan, being a good, smart politician, said, okay, I get it. And then he started, he kind of went 180 degrees. He said, oh, well, we need more lands and we need to protect these lands better and blah, blah, blah. So he got it, He started out saying, I'm a libertarian, and then he ended up saying, no, I get it. These are really popular and we should protect them. But in Project 2025, which was the Heritage Foundation recommendations for the second Trump administration, they were silent on selling off federal land. Did they change their mind about it being a bad idea for the government to have these lands? No, I don't think so. I think instead they made a strategic decision. Okay, we can't just propose a sell-off because that'll get nowhere. But what we can do is we can hollow out the management of these lands, that the American people will finally say, well, it's true. They really don't know how to manage these lands, so we got to give them to somebody else to manage. Let's transfer them to the states or the private sector. The big question, and I don't have an answer to it, is, will it work?
It seems like such a small thing, but whether the bathrooms are clean and well maintained is such a huge thing to people who are using that place.
Sure. And if you've, sat in line, as I have and you have, in a park entrance, it's frustrating, right? I mean, it's like we want to get into these lands and enjoy them and all of that. And if the management system is not working, it gives rise to a certain amount of frustration and all of that. So it could work. I mean, the strategy could work.
So if that's the stick to turn public sentiment against public lands over poor management, would the carrot be affordable housing?
That's the thing that Senator Lee was talking about when he was originally proposing a few months ago to sell off land. You know, it's like, oh yeah, we want to use them for affordable housing because he says the West is being strangled, you know, by all these federal lands and we don't have any place to build housing. That's totally false.
I'm curious how serious you take the movements, the political platforms to sell off or demote the importance of public lands.
Well, it will never go away in the sense that there will always be a relatively small group of people who are truly, you know, economic libertarians. And I don't fault them. I think that's it's a respectable intellectual position. You know, the government should not own a lot of land. So the question is, will public opinion change? There is nothing in the Constitution that says we need public lands or have to have them. Congress could pass a law tomorrow and sell them all off or give them all away, including Yosemite and Yellowstone and all these other places. I mean, it's politics. This is a political process. And so if upcoming generations say, yeah, we don't care about public lands, you know, let's sell them off, blah, 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 it'll happen. I mean, and I think that the thing that really warmed my heart about Mike Lee's proposal, when he made it, was people did engage. People across the political spectrum engaged.
I was trying to think of what are inspirational stories that strike me about public lands. And I started thinking of the Forrest Fenn treasure. I wonder if public lands make treasure hunting like that possible.
The Forrest Fenn thing kind of bothers me because I think it's a gimmick and it incentivize opening up federal land for plunder, kind of. And I'm not sure that's a good thing, that you want people out there with shovels and other things crawling all over the federal lands, including, you know, remote, inaccessible places that, and kind of ruining them just because you're looking for some treasure that some, you know, kind of crazy guy thought it would be fun to, you know. So I'm not a big fan of the Fenn thing.
Okay. Well, how do you feel about influencers on social media driving people out to underexplored areas? Is that a good thing? Are they being loved to death?
That is a risk. Let me give you one example. There's a place that I went to many, many years ago, and I'm sure you've seen photographs of it. It's a place that overlooks some very deep oxbows in the Colorado River.
Horseshoe Bend, just outside Page, Arizona. Maybe you've seen the pictures.
And it's a beautiful place. It was just a spot that a few people knew about, and you could drive out there and see this, and, you know, and then, you know, the internet and everything else comes along. And so now, I think it's now managed by the Park Service, part of the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. So now they've got visitor facilities, all that. We have to keep those lands open to public inspiration. I'm not a big fan of closing them off. And we don't want to build roads everywhere, right? I mean, we don't want to make all of these places easily accessible. Part of the powerful attraction of public lands is that some places are hard to get to and some places are pretty empty, and, you know, there's a lot of value and inspiration connected with that.
I have been thinking about treasure quite a bit lately, and I wondered whether searching for that is really a lesser pursuit than hunting for the best selfie or Christmas card photo. I asked John Collins Black about it.
The controversy probably stems from people having these ideas that people are walking around with shovels, you know, trying to dig up buried treasure, or people are destroying or somehow defacing public land. And again, in my book, I'm very clear about this, you know, and I was very intentional about every step of the way because I really wanted this to be a joyous experience, and obviously it's an experience that kind of has a life of its own, and you cannot control what people do, at the end of the day, but you can definitely strongly encourage certain behaviors. And so, I made it clear that nothing that I hid was buried, and there was no reason to be digging up anything. I think we need to be good stewards of the land, as far as, the way we treat it. But there's no reason that you have to really remove or change anything out there to find any of my treasures. And the other thing I would say is, I think that, on the other side of the argument is, our public lands are public. They belong to all of us. And if we aren't out actually exploring, I don't think we're taking, the true advantage of what we have, at our fingertips.
I really think a lot of the people you meet wandering around wild places are looking for treasure in their own way.
I kind of laugh sometimes and say no land undeveloped. But I think that, I moved out here 20 plus years ago, and I've just watched different open spaces be taken, whether they're state or city lands or federal lands. But slowly we're losing that, and so I think it's really losing the character of this country.
Public lands are a gift. When I'm out here, I feel calm. When I'm out here, I feel energized. And I feel so lucky to be close to public lands.
Well, most of the people out here, when they exteriorize and can, look at the mountains and look at the sky, their problems seem less. They lose their problems. Even if it's a peaceful 2 hours, they still lose their suppression and their whatever they're holding inside.
So we started the show by talking about this guy, Forrest Fenn. Whatever happened to his treasure?
That's my favorite part of his story. Apparently, he hid the chest down in his old favorite fishing spot that he would go to when he was a kid. And John's treasure, it's still out there.
Wow.
I'm not going to throw my life away looking for it, but next time I'm on a hike and pass by a place where someone named Brown used to live, I'm definitely going to explore more.
Yeah, I guess there's treasure everywhere. Nice one, Amanda. Thank you. And thank you to the listener.
I also wanted to thank Nelson Matthews at Western Rivers Conservancy and Friends of Animals attorney Jennifer Best for speaking with me, along with all the folks in Waterton Canyon who let me jump on their hike.
Next time on Sidebar, another treasure of sorts. For a certain section of the internet, the 2024 election was a chance to finally get the elusive Jeffrey Epstein list. But the little black book of infamous convicted sex offender and New York financier Jeffrey Epstein has yet to materialize. But how did an online conspiracy become the one scandal that Donald Trump can't shake? And what does the newest chapter in the Epstein scandal say about Trump's second term? Tune in and find out.